I'm glad everybody got a chance to eat, and again, as General Valenzuela indicated, this is a joint seminar. The American Legion, and Jerome is back there representing the American Legion, has assisted us in putting this thing together, and so we're very proud to have them as a co-sponsor. I think you'll agree with me, we've had some excellent speakers, but the day's not over yet. And we are now going to hear from the marine aspect of this, the water aspect. And we're very fortunate to have a wonderful speaker, and I will turn that over to good Captain.
Thanks, Chef. Thank you. I can get a little audio-visual assistance. I'm not technically qualified to turn that thing on. I tried, and I failed miserably. So, first, thanks for the great intro. A wonderful speaker. I'll let you guys decide that at the end. I was really impressed by the speakers this morning. The director, he just gave us an unbelievable data dump from memory. My brain was full about 4 days ago when I was trying to put this presentation together because we do so many things in the Coast Guard, and I don't necessarily think the public's aware. And one of my mentors that I was working with, Admiral Brown, as we were discussing how I should attack this seminar today, I think part of what I want to talk about is what the Coast Guard's role is in the maritime environment. So, Captain Tony Hahn, I'm the sector commander at Sector Corpus Christi. We'll talk about what a sector is a little bit later, I wear all kinds of hats. I'm the sector commander, I'm an air station commanding officer, I'm the captain of the port for the captain of the port zone for Corpus Christi, which includes Victoria, Corpus Christi, and Brownsville. I'm the officer in charge of marine inspection. I'm the Federal Maritime Security lead. I'm also the Federal Sea Coordinator for pollution response. So there's a whole lot of hats there, and how does that all fit in border security? I would contend they all tie in pretty well. So I'm going to shoot over this. That's what I want to talk about today. Where does the Coast Guard fit in border security? I want you to leave with a really good handle on where I think we are. We're really all facets of maritime security, stewardship, and safety. I'll give you a framework of what we do with a policy and law lens, because that was the kind of point of the seminar. But at the end, I think you really want to hear what we do and what we're doing for you, maybe down in the Corpus Christi area. So I'll kind of close out with that. I think, but the first thing I want to do is I think I really need to provide some context of what the Coast Guard does. So I've got a quick video I'd like you to watch, about 7 minutes, because I think it's going to be eye-opening when you see the breadth of things the Coast Guard does for the maritime. So I'll kick that off, and we'll watch it, and we'll go from there.
For more than 2 centuries, the U.S. Coast Guard has performed complex missions in very challenging environments. At any given moment, an icebreaker is at the literal end of our planet, clearing the way for commerce and scientific research. Aboard a national security cutter on patrol in the Caribbean, an air crew is launching from the deck of a ship to sever the financial supply lines of criminal networks. In America's heartland, marine safety professionals are facilitating maritime commerce, powering our economic prosperity. At command centers, intelligence specialists and cyber professionals are collaborating on systems that have changed the way our globe connects. As the principal federal agency responsible for maritime safety, security, and stewardship wherever U.S. maritime interests lie, the Coast Guard's operations cut across 6 mission programs. Today's Coast Guard is truly a unique instrument of national security and prosperity. It is an operational component of the Department of Homeland Security, an armed service, an emergency management organization, a law enforcement agency, a humanitarian service, a regulatory body, and a member of the intelligence community. The U.S. Coast Guard has a 226-year history of service to nation, a tradition that continues today with tremendous results. deploying ships and intelligence capabilities to prevent illegal contraband from arriving in our communities. From fast-moving panties to self-propelled semi-submersible smuggling vessels carrying tens of thousands of pounds worth of contraband, the Coast Guard uses intelligence to drive their operations and interdict criminals where they are most vulnerable, at sea. The Coast Guard also works alongside federal, state, and local agencies to interdict undocumented immigrants seeking America's shores by sea. The service also supports the enforcement of illegal, unregulated, and underreported fishing laws in the U.S. exclusive economic zone as a part of its maritime law enforcement mission. In July 2015, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer braved 30-mile-per-hour winds and 57-degree water to individually rescue fishermen from their life raft. The Coast Guard is known for these kinds of daring rescues, but the organization's maritime response mission also involves responding to environmental crises. The Coast Guard is often the first on the scene of a hazardous chemical or oil spill on the water. When 14,000 gallons of oil were discharged into the Pacific Ocean in Santa Barbara County, California, the Coast Guard directed the cleanup efforts of 10 federal, state, and local government agencies, Native American tribes, and 55 environmental, non-governmental agencies. Quick, decisive action minimizes damage to the environment, protects wildlife, and preserves the interests of men and women who make their living on the water. 90% of global commerce moves by water, and the maritime system adds 13 million jobs and $650 billion to U.S. GDP annually. U.S. economic prosperity is unquestionably tied to the safety and security of our waterways. The Coast Guard enforces regulations and operating standards for domestic vessels and marine facilities through comprehensive inspections under the Maritime Prevention Program. The Coast Guard conducts inspections of foreign flag vessels and helps facilitate safe and secure maritime commerce. It also regulates recreational boating, keeping boaters safe, whether they're fishing offshore with friends, taking a boat ride on America's Great Lakes, or diving off the Florida Keys. Under the Maritime Transport System Management Program, the Coast Guard restores navigable waterways after extreme weather events, marine accidents, or man-made causes. The Coast Guard also works in conjunction with port partners and industry stakeholders to improve safety using new technology. During the Great Lakes ice season, Coast Guard domestic icebreakers, in conjunction with the Canadian Coast Guard, facilitate the movement of millions of tons of cargo and millions of barrels of gasoline, diesel, and heating oil to the region. Icebreakers also clear passage for research vessels, contributing to scientists' quest for knowledge about the Arctic region while ensuring U.S. freedom of navigation on the world's oceans. As part of a layered approach to homeland security, the Coast Guard conducts maritime security operations to detect, deter, prevent, and disrupt terror attacks and other criminal acts in the U.S. maritime domain. The Ports, Waterways, and Coastal Security Mission is conducted in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security. The service uses its unique authorities and partnerships to board suspicious vessels and escort ships that pose a risk to our ports and waterways. It also enforces security zones around critical infrastructure and provides support during high-profile events. The Coast Guard is also involved in fighting terrorism, not only in U.S. waters, but also around the world through its support of Department of Defense partners. As both a federal law enforcement agency and an armed force, the Coast Guard multi-mission forces are able to integrate with DoD in a wide range of maritime operations, such as the deployment of Coast Guard port security units in Kuwait and Coast Guard patrol boats operating in the Persian Gulf. The Coast Guard is also a full-service maritime development partner with the technical and professional capabilities to help other nations strengthen their maritime operations. The U.S. Coast Guard operates in a complex and ever-changing environment, but its commitment to keeping Americans safe and secure has never wavered. The Coast Guard and its missions touch nearly every facet of the nation's expansive maritime domain. By extension, the service touches the lives of Americans every single day. The American people have entrusted the Coast Guard with tremendous responsibilities, and the service has responded by living up to its oath to support, protect, and defend. America's Coast Guard proudly stands the watch on behalf of the citizens of the United States of America. Coast Guard remains semper paratus, always ready.
Okay, so if you didn't know what the Coast Guard does, that does a really good job explaining kind of the multifaceted and we have over 11 statute missions that we do. So now to the border. You know, when you look at securing the U.S. border, I think the general said it really well. It's, you know, the border's rather large, but if you look at the maritime border, we're at about 12,400 miles versus the land border, 7,000 miles. Now, the land border, as we heard of today, brings some significant challenges. The proximity justifies the attention. The potential threats are close, often visible, and right in our face. The maritime border, not so much. It's what we can do in the Coast Guard and what we do in the Coast Guard, we can project that border security further out. And we do that through a variety of ways. So the Coast Guard construct, we've got different higher order commands, but the basic building block of how we do, you know, border security at the maritime border and the shoreline is through sectors. So that's kind of a breakdown of all the sectors in the United States. So you can see me down here at Sector Corpus Christi, but in that geographical region, each sector has a sector commander, and he's responsible for all the Coast Guard statutory missions within that sector. Different sectors kind of have different emphasis on what they do. Obviously, you know, sector Lower Mississippi is not going to have a big of a law enforcement and border security mission as I am down in Corpus Christi. You know, my emphasis down there is heavily on what we're doing down on the border near Brownsville. So I'll talk about that here shortly. So the maritime border threat vectors, we have many. Illicit traffic, either drugs, weapons, cash, contraband. We can have threats that we don't even have really no control over. Invasive species, Ebola coming in on ships. Everyone's familiar with the recent Ebola scare. I mean, that kept the Coast Guard really busy in terms of what we're going to do in terms of our posture in the ports. We've got threats to our EEZ in terms of, you know, the Coast Guard, the territorial sea for the United States is 12 miles, but we can also enforce exclusive economic zone laws out to 200 miles. And those are the resources that we have. So fishing, all the illegal fishing that goes on, we can enforce out to 200 miles. It's one of the biggest threats in my capture the port zone is illegal fishing. We'll talk about that real specifically here soon. And then obviously all the commercial traffic that comes in that lower right-hand photo. You know, the sheer amount of shipping you saw in the slide, you know, $600 billion a year, 90% of all trade happens in the maritime. So the sheer amount of vessel arriving and leaving the United States creates a huge maritime border security threat. And we'll talk about how we deal with that through layered security. So plenty of threat vectors for us. So how do we go about all of those threat vectors? What kind of authorities do we need? I'd say arguably the Coast Guard has some of the most broadest authority of any federal organization in the U.S. government. When you look at everything we can do, you can see all the titles we are there, but I draw specifically two. Under Title 10, we're an armed service, so one of the 5 armed services of the United States. And under Title 14, we have a law enforcement authority. That gives us some really unique capabilities. I mean, we're the only law enforcement organization that can enforce U.S. law on the high seas. We can also enforce international law on the high seas through bilateral agreements. I'll talk about how we get force multipliers out of that here soon. But that Title 10 and Title 14 combination, we can deploy a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment or tacklet team on a Navy destroyer or a Dutch frigate or a Canadian corvair and enforce international laws from that position. When it's time to enforce law, we just raise the Coast Guard ensign on that ship when we go out and do our business and enforce the law. And that's mostly in the drug enforcement mission, but in other things as well. So under all those authorities, one of the specific I talked about on Captain of Port, well, what does Captain of Port mean? It's an incredible broad set of authorities that each sector commander has that allows us to do certain things. I can establish security zones. If I have a particular high-interest vessel, I think there might be a security threat to that vessel. I can restrict all vessel traffic from approaching that vessel, both statically and moving. So I can establish security zones. I can establish safety zones. If I have a pollution response and I want people to stay out of that area so the responders can get to it, I can establish a safety zone and people have to stay out. I can mandate certain dangerous cargo escorts. It's not the vessel, I think, is the problem. It's not the people on the vessel the problem. It's the cargo that's the problem. If some bad actor was to get to that cargo, it would cause a lot of problems. So in Port of Corpus Christi, we export LPG, propane, highly, highly volatile. So if a bad actor decided to blow up the propane ship as it's coasting by Whataburger Field, that would be a problem. So we have a whole armed force package that escorts that propane ship out of port every time. I can exercise oversight over regulated waterfront facilities, so facilities that deal with any type of regulated chemical or something to damage the environment. I regulate them for response plan in terms of pollution, or I regulate them for security. So every facility on the water, if it meets requirements for regulation in terms of security, we audit their security plans and we go out there and make sure that their facility is secure, because it's everybody's job really in the port, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. I can prohibit vessels from entering or exiting port based on safety or security. If I think the vessel's a threat to the port security, they just have to stay out. If I think they're a threat to safety in terms of, like, we've got a hurricane bearing down, I want to get vessels out of the port, so when the hurricane comes in, we don't have a bunch of vessels sunk or clogging up the channel. We just need to keep those things open so we can make sure the commerce stays in place. I'll talk about these other ones. I'll talk about HIVs and SIVs in the next slide, but keep going. Officer in charge of marine inspection. So the Coast Guard has authorities to inspect vessels in the construction phase to make sure that all their equipment, manning, and operation meets the safety requirements. We want to protect that for mariners. I'll give you the nexus to security, to border security here in a minute. And then those same vessels are inspected throughout their entire life cycle to ensure they maintain that seaworthiness for what they're designed to do. Those vessel inspectors do all kinds of things. And how does that relate to border security? Well, it gains me access in ways I would not otherwise have because of that safety inspection role. There's many times when my safety inspectors are on those vessels and a member of the crew will report some activity that ship should not be doing. That either feeds intel or an enforcement action, or we're able to take action on that. A lot of times, a specific example, there's plenty of ship out there that dumps bilge water, contaminated bilge water at sea. There's requirements for not doing that, obviously. That gets reported to us often by members of the crew, and we can take enforcement actions on that. Federal Maritime Security Coordinator. This is a result out of the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. It mandates that each sector will have an Area Maritime Security Council or committee. So I'm the chair of that committee. I partner with the FBI on that chairmanship, and that committee does port threat assessments, builds the Area Maritime Security Command so we can see what the security posture of the port is, but more importantly, members of that committee are just not members of federal, state, and local officials. It also brings stakeholders from the port, facilities, shipping agents, ship companies, because, as I stated earlier, security in the port is really everyone's responsibility. We're all in it together, and I have to rely on their insights in terms of where the security gaps are. The other thing we do on the Area Maritime Security Committee is we have to develop and promulgate an Area Maritime Security Plan. And each year we review the plan, and then we do several exercises throughout the year to make sure the plan is effective in terms of terrorist threats, terrorist response, those kind of things. So with all that shipping coming, so I kind of talked about the authorities. Now I'm going to talk about, how do we execute those authorities in terms of security for the nation and border security. So One of the biggest things we do in the maritime world with all the inbound and outbound shipping traffic that we have, and this is mostly over 300 gross tons that we're regulating on this, we had to create a system that we could find out early what we have coming in. So we have an approach, kind of a four-tiered approach, where we're screening worldwide in transit, pre-arrival, and arrival. You know, we'll have an idea from, because almost every nation in the world is signatory to the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and under that is the International Standard Security ISPIS code. What's important here is if they're following that code, they have to meet these certain reporting requirements. And we know the folks who don't follow the code, so we know we categorize those vessels in a different way right off the bat. Anyway, so when it's in transit, we get a 96 notice of arrival, and we'll take a look at that vessel. We have classified means to see what some of their activities are, whether they're up to no good or up to good things, and then we can designate that vessel either a high interest vessel. If it's a high interest vessel, that vessel will be boarded at sea by one of my boarding teams prior to coming into port. We check to make sure they met the security requirements. We'll be looking for things that we might be suspect of, and then that vessel can enter port. If it's a vessel that's been to a foreign port that doesn't meet the security standards under IMO, International Maritime Organization, we will board that vessel at sea, ensure that they took extra ordinary security measures when they were in that port. If they did not, I decide whether they get to enter the port, and if I do decide they can enter, I have to put them on different security measures when they're in the U.S. port. The last thing in the pre-arrival and pre-screening is that decision whether or not the cargo will put the port at risk, and that's where we get into those certain dangerous cargoes. Things like LPG, other dangerous cargoes. The other thing we do in the arrival notice, which doesn't really mesh to this system, but any type of military offload, the port does a whole host of things to get the port ready in terms of security for military offload, and we organize and run that committee as well. On the arrival, that's where we really work with our partners at CBP Office of Field Operations. Their job is to screen the crew to make sure that the crew doesn't have any bad actors, and if they do, they work closely with me, and I can create a capture the port order to restrict them to port or to get them out of port. So the thing we do that's very key is when I talked about how we try and push the offense to the security, especially in illicit traffic. One of the things we've done really well in the Coast Guard is through bilateral relationships. We have, there's an example of all the bilateral relationships we have, but what this does is, with these countries, if we come across one of their vessels as a flag vessel, and we have certain intelligence or reasons to believe that they're up to no good, those bilateral agreements will let us go aboard their vessel and enforce international law for drug interdiction, weapons, money seizures. The birth of these bilaterals were all drug interdiction, but over the course of time, we've grown into other illicit traffic, which is really helping keep stuff out of our country. When you look at specifically the drug interdiction piece, you can look at the drug flow. We think about 15 million square kilometer transit zone right there. But those are the different patterns we see. And the Coast Guard sends national security cutters with a force package, a helicopter that can stop the vessels coming up with armed presence and use of armament to stop those vessels. We get huge help from different agencies, JADF East, JADF West on the intelligence side to tell us where our people need to be to go effect those incursions. And then we get great help also for maritime patrol aircraft assets from both the Coast Guard and Customs and Border Patrol, Air and Marine that find the targets. Over the course of years, let me get the statistic because it's pretty amazing. In our last past 15 years in the drug campaign, we've taken 1,000 metric tons of cocaine off the streets, and quite a bit of marijuana too. But most of the marijuana is coming in through land, but we've had great success on that. But I'd like to highlight a couple things. You know, obviously we want to reduce the supply of drugs coming in the U.S., but what we've also found is this, as we take each interdiction we have, we're putting a small dent into the trans-criminal organization's cash flow. So every at-sea interdiction is a large disruption, and the key here is to the wholesale distribution. So the stuff we're pulling off in the transit zone is mostly pure uncut cocaine. And that, you know, when it gets to the United States, it's cut into many ways and distributed differently. But so these are huge, large amounts. So that dent takes money out of their cash flow. Like I said, reduction is important, but we're finding that under our Western Hemisphere strategy, we're really trying to do everything we can to disrupt those trans-criminal organizations. So you saw in the video, the other thing we're pretty busy with is maritime migration and migration interdiction. So over the course of time, we kind of have three major migration patterns that we see in the Coast Guard. We see from Hispaniola down the lower right corner, migrating to Puerto Rico. Once you make it to Puerto Rico, there's no passport needed for travel to the U.S. You know, you just need identification. So that you're in the U.S. when you're in Puerto Rico. So we get a lot of Dominicans to Puerto Rico. From Haiti, a lot of transits up to the Old Bahama Channel to Florida. Cuba, the 90 miles to Key West to get to Florida. And then the most, I guess, there's a huge upward movement of migration from Western Cuba to the Yucatan Peninsula from Cuba. Once you get to Cuba, it's land travel to the border, and once you're, as a Cuban interdiction policies, Cuban migration policy is a little different. It's wide foot, dry foot. If a Cuban makes it to the United States to land, they're not sent back to Cuba. They stay, and that's. But if the Coast Guard interdicts at sea, we send them back to Cuba. So Chris was talking about expedited return and how they were so successful on the border in 2005, 2006. We have expedited return for Haitians that try to migrate to Puerto Rico. We have expedited return for Dominicans, Cubans. We do repatriate them back to Cuba, but once people make it to land, it gets very complex, and it's the same as a land border. So we're talking obviously about land and maritime today. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our new border, and that's cyber. You know, it can affect a whole host of things not working out well for us in the country. We've got a cybersecurity strategy in the Coast Guard, 3 objectives: defending cyberspace, enabling operations, projecting infrastructure. As a sector commander and captain of the port, that's the one I'm focused on. I've got to do my best to bring resources to bear to industries to make sure that they're protected from cyber incursions into their infrastructure, because everything we have, especially in port operations, has some type of cyber or automation piece to it. So whether it's a GPS timing signal, a GPS signal to run certain equipment, access to the internet to run certain SCADA systems. SCADA systems take commands from computer systems and activate machinery and do things. So the wrong cyber signal to a valve and it opens, and then, you know, I have a huge refinery spill in the port of Corpus Christi. And not all those cyber problems could be ill-willed. It could be just mistakes or bad cyber hygiene. So one of my goals at Corpus Christi is we created a subcommittee for cyber on our Air and Maritime Security Committee. And we're also partnered with the FBI to bring an industry called InfraGuard down there. And InfraGuard is a public-private relationship between the FBI and industry to share best practices, highlight cyber hacking attempts that have happened, to share that information so people can learn from them and have be in the best posture to counter them when they happen. Really focused on port waterway security missions, escorts for high-value assets coming to the port, and then protection of living marine resources. So doing a lot of fisheries boardings and making sure that the people are taking the amount that they're supposed to and not taking more than their fair share. Station South Padre, right on the border in Browns, on the Rio Grande, they're consumed with all kinds of illicit traffic coming up, small loads, and then illegal lancha fishing from Playa Baja and Playa Baghdad, which are just south of the Rio Grande and these fishing camps. An important thing I'll talk about this specifically. Well, let me hold for that slide. I think both the director and Chris would agree, border security is definitely a team sport. We get an amazing amount of help from all kinds of agencies. Here in Sector Corpus Christi, I have a secondary role as chair of the Regional Coordination Mechanism, and that's a group within DHS that we were mandated to form about 10 years ago that takes a look at how we can work together better in the maritime environment to cover all the threats to border security, law enforcement, and anti-terrorism issues. So that's just a quick snapshot of our different partners, but a better way to look at it is, that's everyone who plays in my recon. All the DHS agencies that involve law enforcement and border security in there, but I like to highlight, two of our greatest partners are Texas Parks and Wildlife and Texas Department of Public Safety. The Texas Parks and Wildlife are critical to me because they have a shallow water capability that I don't have. So if you know anything about the coastal bend, outside the intercoastal waterway, it's very, very shallow. So not only does Texas Parks and Wildlife have the capability to get their shallow draft boats in where I need them to look at different things, they also help us out quite a bit on search and rescue in those areas as well. Department of Public Safety, they have, as the commissioner said, the director said, they have quite a few vessels that work the Rio Grande, but they also have some vessels that work in the littorals. So we have several planned operations throughout the year with the recon through Operation Sea Serpent. It's a year-long exercise that we build different annexes to for specific surge operations, and both DPS and Texas Parks and Wildlife play in those. So I talked a little about the illegal fishing. This is another great partnership we have in Recon, but the two primary agencies are the Coast Guard and Texas Parks and Wildlife. So Texas claims state waters out to 9 miles. The Coast Guard can enforce federal law especially for fisheries, from 0 out to 200. But what we see in the lancha mission is most of the lancha fishermen are going probably about 30 miles offshore and about 10 miles north of our maritime boundary line. Kind of if you extend the line at the Rio Grande out to 200 miles. Once they're north of that, they're in our EEZ. So we estimate the amount of illegal fish leaving our EEZ from this thread about 780,000 pounds per year. So, when you hear the gravity of the things that the director spoke of and Chris spoke of, this is just fish. Why is I'm talking about fish so much? Well, we talked about how the dollar is driving everything down there. Well, this whole operation is cash flow to the cartel. Make no mistake, this is one other cartel operation that's happening from the border. We see, as a matter of fact, last night I was on the phone about 3 in the morning. We had 2 more lancha seizures last night. So it's happening. Why aren't they just fishing in own waters? Well, the red snapper population is not migratory. It stays in place, and they've outfished their snapper in Mexico. So we have fertile fishing grounds, and they're coming up here to do it. So every lancha we catch, we seize the vessel, seize the catch, and then we don't have a good prosecution mechanism right now for the EEZ fishing piece, and we think we can get there with LACIAC, but right now they're just deported back. Well, they're not deported because it's interesting. In the EEZ, they're not illegally migrating because the EEZ isn't part of the U.S., but it's part. Getting the weeds on the laws, but anyway, we send them back to Mexico. So we do see these guys as repeat offenders. But where we also see these guys is in the nearshore drug interdiction cases we had. We talk about the partnerships. Border Patrol had an extra raid tower. That's a tower with a great sensor capability, camera, and IR detection capability. They just installed that tower at South Padre Island, and we're having some great luck on interdictions because of that. One more slide. So the con-op for everything we do on the water is really the surface and air team. We've got the top left is HC-144. That's a patrol aircraft with a very good sensor package, both infrared, camera, and surface search detection with a very sensitive radar. So we can find where these launches are. And that aircraft has about an 8 to 9 hour endurance. It can stay in the air a long time. So those aircraft will patrol, and then we'll either dispatch the 33 SPC. This is a long-range intercept boat. Go about 55 to 60 knots in 3 to 5 foot seas, very fast. And most of these incursions happen at 1 to 4 in the morning when we find them out fishing. And all the illegal fishing is done by long lines. So and sometimes gill net, which is both also indiscriminate fishing. So whatever bites on the hook, it'll get targeted. So anyway, it's a bad problem. So the concept of operation is these guys, the 144 will find them. We can actually dispatch 33s from South Padre Island, and that intercept will take between 1.5 to 2 hours. And it's a race to the Mexican territorial sea. And as soon as we've established hot pursuit, as long as that Mexican launcher does not make it to the territorial sea, we can interdict them. And we have a very good success rate when we find them. The small vessel on the bottom right, that's an 87-foot patrol boat. They patrol the border for us and have a really good success on the launches we don't find with the 144. They have a really good success rate at masking themselves as commercial shrimpers and sneaking up on them. Now they can't catch them, but they let us know where they are, and then we dispatch the boat out of South Padre Island. And the helicopter does some work for us down too, but mostly inshore we're looking for some controlled movements of drug movements. So. All right, so I think that gave you a quick overview. I had till like about 10 minutes still. 5 minutes, yeah. Okay. So I got some time for questions, but I'd like to just close on this. This is my 14th tour in the Coast Guard. I've been Alaska, Puerto Rico, Washington State, all over. And I can tell you, working in the state of Texas with the people, the community, the state, and local agencies, it's probably the easiest place I've ever been able to be a Coast Guardsman to get things done. It's just an amazing place to be, and the community support and the value they give my people every day as active duty people, it's just wonderful. So I thank you for that, and open for any questions.
What do you do with the catch that you...
Oh, it drives me crazy. We can't. So with the lanchas do not ice down their catch. So sometimes those snapper can be in there for 8, 9 hours or up to 2 days. We usually dispose of it at sea. We get a lot of heartburn for that from people. We try to work to get permission to donate those to like turtle sanctuaries and food banks, and right now we're told we can't, but we're still working that angle. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, earlier I mentioned that I spent a lot of time in Panama, and for the edification of a lot of folks, both sides of the canal. Of course, the canal is 55 miles long, takes about 8 hours to transit, but both sides of both the Pacific and Atlantic, Chinese are dominant, I should say, in the ports, the vessels, and the transportation modes. So a lot of folks don't realize that the Chinese are definitely engaged in that part of the world, and also because of the money laundering aspect, Panama, and the U.S. dollar and the U.S. banks is really a prime place to kind of pass through, stop, and so forth. So I just mentioned that from a transit perspective.
Yes, sir.
All kinds of vessels.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Captain Hahn, you say you have bilateral agreement with Mexico along their southern coast. Does the U.S. Coast Guard assist them in interdicting chemicals coming up that's used for produce meth in Mexico?
So interesting enough, we don't have a bilat with Mexico. We have bilats with Colombia. We have bilats with all kinds of folks. Mexico retains a lot of sovereignty. With Mexico, we do what we call coincidental ops. So we have a good relationship with CMAR, and part of Operation Sea Serpent, we do joint operations once a year, but we don't have the same. For search and rescue, we have good relationships. We can get into their airspace for something like that. In terms of the same level of agreement we have with other countries, it's not the same. But I can get back to you with some specifics. So I don't have as much depth of knowledge on the specifics on Mexico, but I don't believe we have a bilateral with Mexico.
You know, if I can just add a point, then over the history, as was just indicated, from a Somalia perspective, we, the United States, have always invited the Mexicans, Army, Navy, and Air Force to attend our military academies. And for hundreds of years, the Navy has said yes, and the Army and the Air Force has said no. And so when you look at today, the AOG, which is the Association of Graduates, from the Mexican Navy to the American Navy, is a very close, tight relationship, and we get a lot of intelligence, and obviously they're the most productive in the narco-trafficking arena. But from the Army Air Force, they never have partaken, therefore they're very opaque, they're very antiquated in equipment and training, and there's really it's a poor relationship, I guess, as compared to the Navy Marines, which are also the ones that capture also the narcos, and so they're very good partners.
Yeah, General, correct me if I'm right on this, but it's a different construct in Mexico. The Navy is its own entity. They don't report to a Secretary of Defense. It's its own entity, same with the Army. And the Navy is a trusted agent, in terms of, like, the Navy rotates their senior officers very frequently to just even avoid even the appearance of corruption. They move their folks around, and the CMAR Marines are the ones you really see going in and breaking up the cartels. They've got the trust and have some, reports I've heard have avoided corruption better than many of the organizations within Mexico.
Is coastal traffic increasing, decreasing? Was it steady state in terms of bringing illicit products into the U.S.?
I can speak for Sector Corpus Christi and maybe over on the West Coast in Sector San Diego. So the border, Tijuana-San Diego border has a lot more infrastructure. Not as many things get across. Chris had talked about the tunnels that they build and things like that. So they've had an increase in drug flow, coastal drug flow, because of that, the barrier to entry over the border. Rio Grande Valley and Sector Corpus Christi, not so much. If we get that, obviously, if some of the things Chris talked about, if we get that locked down better, I'm highly confident that the flow will increase. We do have a fair amount, though, but one thing we don't have is we don't have really good maritime domain awareness from that, really from Port O'Connor all the way down to Brownsville. Besides having aircraft in the air, we don't have the same infrastructure on the maritime side that the land border side. Obviously, it's needed based on the volume on the land side, but you saw the director's comments about all the aerostats, all the towers, all the coverage of the land border. We don't have that in the same way. And if you look at the Padre Island National Seashore all the way down to Brownsville, it's pretty desolate. There's nothing there.
Is Northcom able to help you at all?
Absolutely. JTF North out of El Paso I have a Northcom, well, I have a JTF North works for Northcom, General Kreitzer. He has put a permit, I have 2 people from his staff that are embedded in my command. I have a major and a Air Force E8, and they help me on my intelligence team, and they also bring resources to bear. I can't talk about the resources to bear they bring, but some pretty amazing capability, and they're really trying to help.
Thank you.
Yep.
Does Customs still have their AWACS radar-equipped aircraft based there at Corpus?
Yeah, the National NASOC, I'm drawing a blank on the acronym, but the National Air Operations Center is out of Corpus Christi. Their primary mission, though, is down in that transit zone, that long-range mission, working for JIADF East and JIADF West to find the targets for the Coast Guard surface assets to get in-game and do the interdiction. It's a long-range, pushed capability. So we don't really see them in the maritime piece, and the aircraft that I have will do a pretty good job, but we don't have the coverage that I'd like. But I'd say that the demand signal for them are where they're being used. Yes, ma'am.
You have the icebreakers in Antarctica? Is that Coast Guard?
We have one, right now we have one working heavy-duty icebreaker, and we have one medium-duty icebreaker.
And what about the Japanese fishing down there? Are they still a problem?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. The icebreakers, they do a couple things. They project U.S. sovereignty where we think we need to be, so that we're always, we're making sure we're protecting what we need to protect. And they support the National Science Foundation to do research down in McMurdo. But what we're really concerned about is not the Antarctic, it's really the Arctic, because with, the ice is receding up there, and it will be, if the scientific projections hold, it'll be a way to move commerce through the Northwest Passage once again. And obviously, it's also being opened up for significant oil exploration. So we need to have a presence up there to make sure that...
And you got the Russians up there.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have to have a presence up there to
We're able to pursue vessels into Mexican waters.
No, we can pursue them if we establish, this gets really technical, I'm sorry. If we can establish hot pursuit in the US EEZ and maintain it, that means one vessel starts it, like we started with an aircraft. And so, let me explain how pursuit. All right, for us to be able to arrest or to seize this launcher, we have to have continuity of pursuit until we catch them. And the reason why you have to hand that off is because we run out of gas, or the launch is faster than the initial boat that chased them. So what happens is, usually either the 87-foot patrol boat or the HC-144 establishes pursuit. And then we have to maintain that pursuit. We have a whole checklist that the lawyers make us, check off. And make sure that we don't screw it up. And we have to establish pursuit. We have to do several things. It's just not as easy as flying over. We have to call them on the radio. We have to signal our light. We have to get down really low so they can see the vessel, so they can see the asset that's chasing them if it's an aircraft. So we get down, right down to 200 feet above the water in that twin turboprop to make sure they see us. Okay? And we have to maintain that pursuit until our end game asset, the 33 out of South Padre, can catch them. If we can't maintain it, and the handoff has to be in real time, so they have to see us, they have to see the boat, and as soon as that happens, we maintain hot pursuit. There's a couple other technicalities to it, but that's essentially it. So if we maintain hot pursuit until the Mexican territorial sea, we can still effect an interdiction. If they make it in the Mexican territorial sea, 12 miles in, then they win. Yeah, we can't win. But we're pretty good. We're pretty good at catching them. It depends how far north the Depends how far they are. And we run the math really quick. My command center runs the math really quick, and they go, yeah, we think you'll get them, you'll have like 6 minutes to spare or something. And we'll try. It's, it gets the adrenaline flowing, and it's a good mission for us. So. All right, well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.